Everybody, how's it going this week? Whoa, I am tilted. Tilt. Woo! Alright, move around. Alright, is that better? I think that's better. So how's it going this week? So I just got back from my first video since Anthrocon 2019, and it's a very good time. I enjoyed myself, and I certainly found myself pretty busy. We had our nonfiction panel, and I thanked all the people who showed up to that. Certainly hope to do more in the future, and hopefully it'll be more organized and a little bit better instead of doing impromptu things. But I think we covered, interestingly enough, I think that hour covered exactly what needed to be covered, and it went rather well. I ended off pretty good. Talked about a few things such as what the importance is of nonfiction in the modern era. Keeping records of things so that when people are looking back in history, they can remember the old times, because Twitter and social media isn't really good at that. Twitter and social media typically are good at keeping track of the modern things, but not really good at keeping track of history, or knowing when history is pertinent to an individual. That being said, enjoyed a lot of other things at convention. I was part of the parade, and that was pretty cool. Like I've been in the parade a few times, and it still is it's very cool that they still do that outside, and that the people of Pittsburgh can enjoy that. So there's a picture from it thanks to Hakuza Dragon, who took this photo. So basically, it was warm, and I mean like really, really, really warm. Luckily, the parade doesn't stay outside too long, because it was bright and it was humid and it was like, now interestingly, like the rain was kind of on and off all weekend. In fact, there were flood warnings that happened in people's smartphones every once in a while. There'd be like flood warning. Oh, okay, and then it would downpour and things like that. Luckily, I had my laundry bag, because I wasn't in the Westin Hotel. I was in a disconnected hotel. So luckily there was, I had that with me. I never had to use it, because whenever I went to and from the hotel, it seemed to not be raining. But I had it just in case I had to go back to the hotel when it was raining. I had it stuffed in my carry bag, and it worked. And luckily I never had to use it, but it was there if I needed to. It's a very good idea. Picari covered it on her channel. I covered it on my channel once as well. Picari did it much better. She got a higher production value. But at the end of the day, I think that the humid was so bad out there that I was telling the people in the audience, like, man, you guys better keep hydrated, because, whoo boy, standing out there in the sun has got to be like a... Woo, because they had to stand out there for like 45 minutes, like, to watch the whole parade. Whereas I only had to be out there for like maybe 5 minutes at most. But one of the highlights of the convention certainly was the aftermath of the parade, where I had somebody step on my big old tail during the parade, and it happens. If you have a big old tail, it's going to happen. Someone's going to step on your tail, particularly in a parade. And I had someone step on it, even though I had the leverage thing hooked up. And so, she apologized. She's like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on your tail. I'm like, that's all right. It happens once every parade. It happens, and you have a long tail, And she's like, yeah, I understand. And she had like a long tail herself. And so I asked her if it was her first time, in the parade. And she's like, oh, for this convention, yes. This is my first time in the fursuit parade for this convention. And it wasn't her first convention. She talked about other conventions. We talked about conventions and things like that. She was at Furthermore. I go, oh yeah, I wrote an article. I was there for the premiere year of Furthermore, and I wrote an article about it. And then she, her eyes lit up, and she's like, oh yeah, I know you. You're that guy who writes those articles. And I'm like, yeah. And it's like, and I'm like, aren't you glad you stepped on my tail now? And it's kind of funny when, it's like, I do kind of like not being really well known in the fandom. I kind of like having this sort of if people knew what you do, then they know you, but like they don't know you like off the top of their head. I kind of like that idea because it's like it makes me able to observe things in a more neutral stance better. Not like Alkali or Kage or like any other people who are like really well known in the furry fandom who can barely like, they can't go anywhere without being recognized. It sort of gives me the opportunity to kind of like observe things from an interesting perspective, but have every once in a while somebody will go, "Hey, I know you and your work," and it's like, "Oh, great!" It's like you feel the love for it, and it's greatly appreciated. Like I always as nonfiction, I always think of things like it's not your job to be well known; it's your job to tell the story. So if you're telling your story well, then that means that your name there really has no relevance. Interestingly enough, whenever I'm reading nonfiction, I don't really go, "Oh, who's the author?" Right? The only time that the author really lets their name be known, or is if they're running for political office, or if they are, a pundit, or if they are somebody who's in that kind of line of work. Typically, otherwise, usually the work belongs to the paper or it belongs to the community, and people disseminate that information a lot. But they cite their source on the reference of like, oh, the Miami Herald did this or the New York Times did this. You usually don't have the individual who wrote this piece really famous for it, unless you're like a Bob Woodward or something like that, covering like the Nixon era Watergate stuff. You usually don't become too famous. Even like Bob Woodward and individuals like that aren't really famous. You'd have to like know history and things like that in order to really get a feel for it. But I'm rambling about nonfiction stuff now. So the panel went really well. I participated in other things, like I did participate in the Mario Maker tournament thing, and unfortunately it didn't go well because it's a new game. Mario Maker 2 is a new game, and their internet thing didn't work too well, so we never really got a chance to finish that. Oreo was there, and he did rather well. I never got a chance to really go because it took way too long because of the lag issues. Like literally, the lag issues were so bad that like people were going 3, like the countdown. Like there's like these 2 players and they race to the end of the map, and so like the countdown would happen. It would be like 3, 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, 2, and it's not really the organizer's fault. I mean, the concept that the organizer had was actually a pretty good one. Unfortunately, the logistics and the capabilities of the software and what it was couldn't really handle the amount of internet needed and lag things and things like that. It was unfortunate that it ended up that way, but I hope that in the future that either they'll put the tournament before a little bit before the gaming room closes, or maybe change the format up a little so it relies a little less on the internet. Other than that, let's see what else did happen. So I found a thing to do. And I was in the dealer's den. I didn't really buy too much. I'm not really much of a purchaser kind of person. I'm a simple person who has simple means, and I have my costume and things. I don't like go buying a lot of art from a lot of artists and things like that. Interestingly, that like helps me connect with those creators a little bit more because it's not like I'm being friends with them because I want anything out of them. Because it's like I don't really have those kind of thoughts and desires. I do like observing the community and learning a lot about it and learning more every day. But I do have other friends who obviously have wants and desires, and unfortunately, I have a second friend now who has been sort of burned in the whole buying process of a fursuit, where they had put an offer on the table and or gotten under contract and paid for a fursuit and ended up not getting things in a timely manner, or feedback in a timely manner, or things like that, and then the communication stuff breaks down. And so what I did, this is the second sort of instance that I've known someone personally who's been burned in these kind of situations. I'm sort of coming up with a sort of long-term goal concept for a pair of articles dealing with the purchasing of fursuits. One from the customer's perspective on how to be a good consumer when buying fursuits so that you don't burn yourself. We've had issues like that in the past. Very famously, the daughter of Violent J, who has sort of left the fandom. They're not really part of the fandom anymore, but she and her father did a video about being burned by these Chinese knockoff companies and utilizing that kind of thing. But also in a general sense, like how do you, what questions should you go forth with? What items should you be providing to your fursuit? What kind of items should you have in preparations for your fursuit quote and inquiry? Things like that to help smooth the process over and let you know if you were dealing with somebody who's a professional who will not take your money and run, who will do the job that is offered of them. But also from the other perspective, as fursuit designers, like have a second article about them and how they should go about. If you're new to fursuit creation, how to make your hobby into a business and things like that. And so I went around the dealer's den and I got a bunch of cards and from people who seem to be in the fursuit crafting business. I've written a letter that'll be sent to each and every one of those guys, and basically they should be receiving a mail in the next coming weeks about the interest in the long form article, and they'll have like a questionnaire form that'll be sent out. I give myself a month or so to peruse and think about the kind of questions I should be asking and things like that. Because an interesting thing is, like, even though I have a fursuit, I never went through that whole experience. I never went through the experience of having to find somebody to do a fursuit and do all that stuff. I just happened to be born into a situation where I knew somebody who was very crafty. And I grew up with somebody who was very crafty and was able to sort of get lucky in that sort of sense. It's interesting how luck sort of plays a hand in some things. So I didn't really have to go searching for a fursuit creator. The person who was my fursuit creator was somebody I knew very, very well. Isn't really was sort of like not really delved deep into the fandom. They're not really popular in the fandom, and they're not really into the fandom really all that much. But they did want to try their hand at costume design and things like that, and they did a very good job. And it's served me well over these past. It's been almost half a decade now since I've had this fursuit, and it still runs pretty well. Had to get my tires repaired because my feet took some damage, but other than that, not too bad. So, that being said, Anthrocon closed out, and they had a few things to say on things. They gave out their numbers. Hey, they gave out their numbers. So it was around where it was projected to be, 93,000. I had it at 92,000 and a half. I had it at 9.25K. They ended up having about 100 more than expected, which is great. They provided watts of sound. Watts of sound. What am I supposed to do with a statistic like that? I heard this kangaroo guy likes numbers, says the chairman. I know what kind of numbers it is. Take those numbers. See what you could do with those. It's like watts of sound. Okay. I don't think any other convention has given out their watts of sound. I don't know how that number. It's like, and where did you collect that information from? Did you go and collect it from the DJ sessions? Because I mean, it's near that number. Or did you go to the dealer's den? I mean, how noisy? Watts of sound is not a constant, it's a variable. I mean, I'm being really loud right now, and then I'm being really soft right now. It's like, was it an average? Was it I don't know, man. That number is just like extremely curious. I'm like, huh. Well, aren't you being facetious? Like, I'll give you all the numbers you ever wanted and more. Here, have at it, bro. Anyways, but yeah, it's great that they were able to get their numbers out. And you know, other furries had their little fun skits with it. And they had their own little numbers of things. What's his name? Adler the Eagle did a little skit called "Sitting on a Red Bench," and they had apparently 50 people sitting on an invisible bench for his little thing. And there's a video up there for that situation. I didn't get to see a lot of furry YouTubers a lot because I was, you know, doing my other things, and but you know, it's always good to. And it's like I don't really find myself part of that scene really. Even though I do have a YouTube channel, I don't really see myself as like one of those furry YouTuber skit people and like things like that. And I always, you know, as a person who writes nonfiction and as a fan of the stuff myself, I always kind of feel like it's like I should let them do their things, right? I shouldn't like bother them or interrupt them too much on their things, because you know you feel like you might be stifling their creativity, right? It's like if you're hanging out around them too much. So I kind of like letting them go free and do their own things. But interesting thing I saw was that I watched a video about the Fursuiting 101 panel, right? And they took an interesting perspective on it, and that was like they had those professional YouTubers, Jim Kobe, or the well-known students like Jim Kobe and Andler the Eagle. You know, sort of like taking things in stride and sort of showing examples on how to do it. Back in the day, those kind of 101 panels, they were they weren't that way. They were more like, you know, if you were a beginner fursuiter, you would bring on your fursuit, and you know they would actually kind of help you in that. And I really hope that isn't lost. Because that sort of experience of getting up there and doing your own thing with it, and not just relying on the professionals to show by example, because like I think YouTube offers that opportunity for professionals to show sort of things that people will learn by example, right? It's like if I want to show you how to walk in fursuit or stride in fursuit or emote in fursuit, right? If I want to show you how to do those things, I could do those things on camera, and I could do those things on a YouTube thing. Whereas, like, going to a convention, it's more of a personal experience, right? Actually being able to get involved in those kind of things. And the cool thing is like, even if you don't have a fursuit, you can get involved in a lot of things. Fursuiting actually does have its hindrances when you're conventioning, and that is being able to go out to eat, right? You don't want to wear your expensive fursuit to a restaurant. It can kind of get very clunky. So, like if all your friends are going to go out to eat and they're ready for you, and you're the guy in the fursuit, they've got to wait for your sorry butt to go back to your hotel room, take the thing off, and then come back down, right? It could get kind of burdensome sometimes to have a fursuit. There are certainly disbenefits to having it. There are obviously benefits, like you get to go on the elevator faster. But interestingly, like, unless you're in the West End, that doesn't help too much. And interestingly, like if all the fursuiters went into the West End, well, then you're back into square one, right? It's like everyone's got to wait in line. The fursuit line is going to be really long. But how those things are dealt with in the future is going to be interesting. It sounds like, the one thing also that kind of signified this year, the roof was closed for the David Lawrence Center. And the David Lawrence Center had its roof closed due to construction and basically repairs and also renovations that are going to occur. Apparently, they're going to have a very lush green roof thing. They had some examples of it on the one side there of the convention center. They had some examples of like the sort of green roof where you had like plants and stuff like that. And a lot of people took photos out there in that interesting thing, and it was actually very fascinating. And they had like little things up showing you how it works, as far as like how it takes water from the soil and it helps with irrigation, etc., etc. Instead of dumping all the water down in the sewers, you're using it for your plants and things like that. And apparently that whole sort of upper roof part is eventually either next year or the year after is going to have like sort of an urban jungle sort of feel to it. And it's just going to make for a very interesting place for fursuit photos for sure. It's going to get a little bit more on the urban wild side, as it were. And I very much look forward to seeing that in the future and seeing how that plays into things. The funny thing is that the renovation originally wasn't supposed to be happening during Anthrocon, and I remember Kage bragging from at Biggest Little Fur Con when they were having renovation issues during the convention at Biggest Little Fur Con. Kage is like, well, I was smart enough to make sure that renovations wouldn't happen during my convention. I put it in that dang contract. And it's like, you did, huh? Well, I remember that tweet. And then it's like, oh, and then like about 5 weeks later, like, no, was it 5 weeks? It's a few weeks later. Then I see this thing from Boozy Badger going, oh yeah, by the way, the roof is going to be closed. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Whatever happened to that contract? I'm just teasing. It was fine. It wasn't really it didn't have too much of a negative impact on the flow of things. Basically, if you wanted to go from the zoo to the upper floor zoo on the one side of the convention center to the upper floor gaming rooms, you'd have to go down the escalators and then back up the escalators as opposed to going straight across the roof. So, I mean, it didn't have too much of a negative impact on things. And by the sounds of it, like this project is actually going to make the space a whole lot nicer and a lot more interesting aesthetically. Instead of like having just pavement up there, you're going to have like plants and things. And I do look forward to seeing how that impacts things in the future. But anyways, I've rambled on long enough about my AC 2019 experience. I know a lot of you went there, and if you feel free to share your highs and lows of your convention experience in the comment section below, that'd be very much great. So kick a comment in the comment section, kick a like, kick that subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next week when we talk about our next topic, whatever that happens to be. And let me see if I click the end card. Yay!